It's starting slowly. Okay, the live stream is up, just so you all are aware. And Andrea, this is your meeting, so I'm just here to support you as a guest. If you want to give it a few more minutes or go ahead and start, whatever you'd prefer.
Maybe let's give it a minute so we can hopefully, until the beeps kind of slow down a little bit, which may be soon. Hi, Anita.
Hey, Patrick, I was just going to send you a chat, and as I was doing it, it got disabled. Do you know, are we going to share the live stream on the CRB city page too, or is it just going to be?
No, it's just a separate page since it's not a CRB meeting, but I can put the link in the chat box. And you know, if you, whatever you want to do with the recording after, Brandon, I can get it to you. I think it saves it on this thing, but if you want a copy to put to the CRB thing, that's fine too.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Make sure I have the link correctly.
I have the YouTube link from the agenda, so.
Yeah, okay. I created a shortened version of that that's easier to communicate and remember. So I just put that in the chat, and everyone should be able to see that. If you want to share the live stream address with other folks, feel free.
Okay, we'll give it just a little bit more time because I don't want everybody to be distracted by all the beeps. But it sounds like it's beginning to slow down.
Andrea, I've changed the settings so that the only people who hear the admit beep are the three of us, the co-hosts of the meeting.
Okay, so then let's go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everybody. I'm really excited about this forum tonight. And I want to give credit where credit is due. It was the CRB Outreach Committee who believed that it was important to hold a series of forums to find out what the community really wants in this new commission. We had one forum earlier, and it was kind of like a general forum to find out, you know, what people were thinking and in what direction we should go in the following forums. For tonight, though, we're going to delve into a specific topic, and it is the topic that most people are concerned about, and that is the process for nominating the commissioners for appointment. Who is going to be on this commission? It's the one question that I have gotten, I think, from the very day we started working on this, and it is still the hot topic. Patrick already let everyone know that this is also being live streamed, but I want to let you know that the email address for giving comments in the future is still up. It's still running. It will continue to run up, to be up and running. So if there are any comments that you have after tonight that you're just thinking of and want to give them, or you know other people who want to give comment, please have them just email those comments to this email address. And it is cppoutreachcommittee@gmail.com. And I am going to go ahead and put that in the chat as well.
Andrea, I just put it in so you wouldn't have to.
Okay, great. So you can see that in there, and because we want everybody's comments. So I would like to Also welcome my two co-hosts, Patrick Anderson and Poppy Fitch. They're both current members of the CRB, and I will give it over to them for a self-introduction.
Poppy, would you like to go first? Okay. Hi, everybody. If you were at the first community roundtable hosted by CRB, you know who I am. I'm Patrick Anderson. I'm a professor at UC San Diego, and I am also a current CRB member. I'm a member of the transition committee of the CRB, a committee that was chartered by the current CRB chair, Brandon Hilpert, who's here. And that is chaired by CRB member Doug Case, who's also here. So props to them for that. And I was recently asked to be the chair of the outreach committee. And in that time, just in the last few months, it's extremely important to me that every stage of this transition process be transparent and be focused on what the community wants so that we can ensure Measure B or the new CPP lives up to Measure B's promise. Andrea asked me to share a couple things with you. So if you'll excuse me, I'm going to share my screen. There it is. And let me just scroll to the top of this document. So Andrea is going to talk about our hopes for tonight, but as you'll remember at the first community roundtable on November 30th, we identified a list of core concerns for the community, and we said that future roundtables would be focused on each of those different concerns. So as Andrea said, tonight we're focused on the question, how will commissioners be selected? The outcome from the first roundtable, Andrea wanted me to report back to you what we've done. So if you attended the first roundtable, sent comments, or anything like that, then you should have received a very long 64-page document, which included all comments live in that roundtable, in the chat box and via email. I just posted the document in the chat so you can see it there and download it if you haven't already. Poppy and I compiled those comments and synthesized them. And 3 days later, we presented them to the CRB and CPP Transition Committee. And then the executive committee, including the chair and first and second vice chairs, have presented that information to the new mayor and to city council members. In addition, the community wanted to make sure that you all are represented on the transition committee. So I requested that one non-CRB community member who was identified by San Diegans for Justice as Kate Yavenditti be appointed, and that appointment was approved by Chair Brandon Hilpert and by Committee Chair Doug Case. Kate joined her first meeting last week. I also requested that all transition committee meetings be recorded and posted to the City of San Diego's Public Meetings YouTube page, which is now happening. I've also raised questions about the bylaws. This was a major issue of concern for the community. At the last transition committee, I confirmed that the bylaws developed by interim commissioners would only be interim bylaws. So the final bylaws would be developed by the permanent commissioners. And finally, I made a request that a non-CRB member be involved in the drafting of those, pardon me, interim bylaws. And so Brandon Hilpert, the chair of CRB, appointed Kate Yavenditti to serve in that role. So this roundtable, as you know, is being live streamed. That's the link for it. You're also welcome to reach out to the same email address. I'm also keeping a personal record of that's sort of tracking Measure B, where mostly just to make sure I'm keeping on track. There's also a list that's regularly updated of, it's all public information, but things that I've been doing to represent the community in the way that the community wants to be represented. That's where you can find that list. Okay, finally, some Zoom protocol. Please keep your microphone muted when you're not speaking. Please use the raise hand button. To do that, you'll click the participants button at the bottom of your screen, and you should see a little hand at the bottom of that list with some text that says raise hand. I'll be facilitating and moderating the conversation with Andrea and Poppy, and I'll call on people in order. You asked at the last roundtable that rather than just calling on individuals, I give you a sense of the next 3 or 4 speakers so you know where you are. And so I'll do that again this time. Be mindful of the many community members here tonight. It would be helpful if you try to keep comments to about 2 minutes, but I will play a gentle role in trying to help us keep moving along. I also just want to show you briefly the first page of the document that I shared in the chat box. Again, it's a 64-page document, but these are the themes and issues that emerged at the last roundtable and in emails. And tonight we're focusing on, it's a long list, just to warn you. Tonight we're focusing on the very first one, which is the selection process for the new commissioners. Andrea also asked me to make sure I did a land acknowledgement tonight, as we did last time. I used my own campus's land acknowledgement. Tonight I thought I'd use the one developed, it's a beautiful one, by San Diego State. So although we're distributed all over San Diego, we are all still on Kumeyaay land. For millennia, the Kumeyaay people have been a part of this land. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the San Diego community, we acknowledge this legacy. We promote this balance and harmony. We find inspiration from this land, the land of the Kumeyaay. It's such a beautiful statement. I think San Diego State did a great job developing that. And with that, I will hand it over to Poppy.
I should not have followed you, Patrick. Thank you very much for that introduction of yourself and the extensive work of the Outreach Committee and the Transition Committee. I want to acknowledge our chair, Brandon Helper, and our first vice chair, Doug Case, and their work and leadership. My name is Poppy Fitch. I'm second vice chair, and I'm representing the executive committee tonight. And in this series, I am going to be the woman behind the screen. I'll be monitoring the email and chat. And that is all I will say, because you said it all so well, Patrick. Thanks for having us, Andrea.
Thank you, Poppy. We talked about the results of the first forum, and there are a lot of questions that we need to answer tonight in terms of who we want to be commissioners. And so I just kind of want to suggest some questions that you should consider answering tonight. So the first one will be who and how will commissioners be nominated for appointment? And I want to be clear about this. The city council will officially appoint the commissioners, but there needs to be a process to nominate them. And that's what we need to figure out. What qualifications should a commissioner have? And what should be the grounds for removal of a commissioner? Okay. I want to get us started talking, but I know it's difficult sometimes to think about, just answer the question, what do you want? So I want to start off by letting you know some things that I have been hearing from the community that the community is kind of coalescing around. And I want to talk about that, not to stop conversation, but to start conversation. I want people to not only weigh in on what other people in the community are thinking, but also come up with whatever ideas that they have. So I don't want anything I say right now to stop you from giving your comments and giving your suggestions as who and what the commissioner should be. The first thing that I have heard from just about everybody is they want the appointment or the nomination of commissioners to be as apolitical as possible. That, you know, they don't want politics to play any part of it at all. The second thing that I have heard quite a bit is that people want to see the community involved in nominating the commissioners. So having perhaps some type of a selection committee made up of community members themselves. That, of course, begs the question, how are those community members who are on the selection committee, you know, appointed? Kate Yavandetti, who is the community member working with the CRB right now in the transition, suggested that the current organizations or the organizations that were behind Measure B form the initial selection committee. We, of course, would like to hear from everyone what your thoughts are on, if you want a selection committee made up of the community, how should those community members be appointed? We've also heard a lot of comments about having district representation and proportional representation. For example, what that really means is having, let's say, for example, one person appointed from each district to start out with, and then additional members appointed based on the district they're in and how much police activity there is in each of those districts. For example, districts that have heavier racial profiling or stops or arrests, they may have disproportionately more members on the commission than others. So these are just kind of some of the things that community members have mentioned. I'd like everybody to start raising their hands so they can start giving comment, you know, on what they believe should be the process, what they believe the qualifications of a commissioner should be, and let's get started.
Thank you so much, Andrea. I think that gets us started on such a great foot. I was asked to acknowledge, by the way, that the council members have taken a very strong interest in this work and are grateful to community members for what we're doing with roundtables like this. And I was asked to acknowledge that as far as we've been able to see, we have 2 council members present tonight, Council Member Whitburn and Council Member von Wilpert. So thank you for being here. We're glad you're here. Okay, I have 2 hands raised already. Again, just to make sure everyone understands, if you click the participants box and then click raise hand, which should be an icon at the bottom left of that screen, that's how you raise your hand. So we have Francine followed by Larry.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I just needed to ask the question. I missed the website that you told us to go to. The CRB recently had new people added, and we don't know who those people are in the community. So how do we find that out? And I think that you gave the website at the top of the meeting and I missed it.
Okay, thank you for that question. The website I gave you is my own personal tracking site for how things are going. I'm just going to put it into the box right now. If you go to that link and click, oh, I'm sorry, that didn't go to everybody. If you go to that page and click tracking Measure B, that's where I'm keeping track. I don't have the list of new members. I know they're in the city council minutes. I can ask that they be posted. So Brandon, do you want to answer that briefly?
Yeah, I can quickly chime in. So the city council has confirmed them, but not all of them have been sworn in. So as soon as that happens, what we'll do is what we've done in the past is we will have an updated list on the CRB website of who all the members are and the districts that they reside in. So I'll work with our executive director and we'll get that updated as soon as all the members are officially sworn in. I'm hoping, you know, early part of January. A couple of them are on vacation or on holidays, but we'll get that posted as quickly as possible.
And I'm hearing that their pictures will also be posted on that site. But Francine, I personally will follow up on your question. And as soon as that, so you don't have to keep checking the page. As soon as the list is up, I will distribute it to all, to that long list of emails I have in my update after this roundtable. So I'll make sure you know when it's posted. Okay, I think our next speaker is Larry, followed by Charlie, and then Darwin. So Larry, you're up.
Yes, I just had a comment about operations here. The chat is disabled on our side, so it might be helpful if we were able to put into the chat or ask questions while things are going on. I'm not sure if that's the way you
It shouldn't be. I know lots of people have been chatting.
Mine's disabled.
It's disabled. It just became disabled for some reason.
Yeah, it's disabled.
Okay, so I'm gonna work on figuring out what that is and why that's happening. So thank you, Larry, for drawing my attention to that. And I'll move on to Charlie and then Darwin.
Patrick, can I just say something? If you go to the three dots down at chat and hit that, go down and click the bottom where it says participant can chat with everyone publicly and directly.
Does that fix it?
The chat is back.
Thank you.
It's enabled. Yeah, that's so strange. Okay.
I have no idea why that happened. Larry, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay,
Hi,
Charlie.
Yes, hi. Just a quick question. What's the length of the term for a commissioner?
That has yet to be determined, Charlie. What do you suggest it be?
Oh, wow, put me on the spot.
Well, I mean, that's what everybody is here for. We're here to hear what you want.
Wow, 2 years comes to the top of my head. I mean, a year, you're just getting started. 3-4 years, you're looking at burnout, in my opinion. I think 2 years might be a good start.
Okay, I've got 2 years ? Under Charlie's name. But that's a really important question. I think we'll want to keep talking about. Okay, let me go back to my list. We've got Darwin, followed by Evie, followed by Luana. So Darwin, you're up.
All right, thank you. And thank you guys for hosting this. I'm curious, someone that was on the CRB and then also working the Racial Justice Coalition on these issues. I'm just curious to get clarity on the timeline for the current CRB members. Is the plan that they will phase out, like is there a thing January and then new members will phase in? Is there a set timeline? And then the other thing too, the other question I have is about, in general, are you looking for a process in the sense that will be open to the public that apply, or will be a process in which is done through government like this, like the city council has to recommend members?
I think we don't have answers to either of those questions. And what I hope is that the community will tell us what they prefer. So I've made notes that you have one question about the phase out of current CRB members and interim commissioners, and that the relationship of that calendar to the phasing in of new commissioners. And then your second question is about who is actually doing the selecting and how community members can apply, who will be considering those applications, and so on. That's a major area of concern. So I think we'd love to hear what you think and what everyone else thinks. Andrea?
So Darwin, on the first question, we'd like to know, would you like to see commissioners simply phased in, or an entirely new board appointed at once? At this point, you're aware that the current CR members have will automatically become commissioners, but there will be interim commissioners until the new city council can appoint the permanent commissioners. So Darwin, we'd like your opinion. Do you think it should be all at once? Do you think it should be phased in? And then you asked also about who was going to be doing the selection of the nominees. And that's the question that we're answering right now, that we want you all to give us your opinion. At this point, the city council is merely going to appoint, but there needs to be a selection process. And do you want it Do you think it's best that it be simply by application and that the selection committee vet the person to see if they have reached the minimum qualifications, then interview them and then select them for nomination? What do you think, Darwin?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And I think it should be completely new members for the commission, and it should be new staff. And they, in that sense, should go in training together and prepare for it based on the new commission, this new model. So I would definitely advocate for that. And then going from there, the new commissioners should, the new commission should decide that in terms of how I came on being interviewed by those commissioners. They should determine that, and I think it should be through the public. And in that sense, if there's a way that it's not done through like city council or the mayor, that would be the best process and give the community the most active role in it.
Thank you, Darwin. I've got those written down, so that's very helpful. Thank you. Next up is Evie, followed by Lawana, and then Rose. Evie, I think you're on mute.
All right, thanks, Patrick. Yeah, and it's Evie.
Sorry, Evie.
Yeah, a couple of things. One, what criteria or qualifications or have you been using up till now, including the new 5 people, for putting them on the council? I mean, on the CRB. So what have you been using, if anything? And then I would like to interject, since we've gotten already to that a little bit with Darwin, that there not be a, how shall I put it? An interim mixing new people with new commission people with the ongoing responsibilities of the CRB while they are still trying to look at cases and work as they need to monthly to keep up with things. That very first thing that get done as the new commission is to have these people decided upon by whatever process we're talking about now from the community, and then have that commission meet to put itself together to hire its new director and decide on what processes they're going to use, etc. So I'm suggesting there not be a transition in terms of the new people learning how it's done with the old people. In other words, they need to look at and see what they need to set up and how they need to do it themselves, rather than trying to make a change after they've learned and have worked with the old CRB.
So it sounds like what you're advocating is a hard break, that there not be a staggered appointment, but that there be a hard break. Am I hearing that right?
Yes, and that they get selected, and then they sit down and they organize themselves. They find out what it is they need to know, either from other groups or however, in terms of how they want to organize, and they need to choose their leader. And that should be the first thing they probably do. And that should happen quickly, so that while the current CRB is continuing keeping up with what they need to keep up with, this is being organized in side by side.
Okay, thank you. And I don't have the answer to your first question about current practices because I'm not on the committee that interviews potential members, but I will do some research and report back to you the information I get from my colleagues on the current CRB about how it currently happens. And I'll include that in the email to everyone.
Okay. Evie, can I ask you? Yeah. Can you tell me what qualifications you would like to see in the new commissioners?
Well, I think some of it, I was on the forum last time, and so I know at least remember a lot of what was said. I think that they need to be of the community and from the community groups that feel that this is a most important issue to them. And I think those were the ones, as you say, worked with Measure B, trying to get Measure B, but also they worked a lot before that. And there may be other people and groups that have been trying to get something new to happen. So I think there should be some way of having a broad opening to the community to suggest people, as well as for people to self-suggest and see what you come up with. But the particular criteria I think, should include things such as people who have had some experience with interaction on the community side with police, perhaps have even at some point been arrested. That shouldn't keep anyone from being there. But what other things would be there that one would look for would, take all this into a balance. I don't think that there should be police or military people or people connected with either, because it's a different mindset than a civilian oversight. Not that, they know the police department well, but that doesn't mean that a civilian oversight needs to have that kind of a mindset in having to look at what they look at. But those are two major things from my perspective.
Thank you very much. If it's all right with you, Andrea, did you want to follow up before I move on to Luana?
No, please move on.
Okay. Thank you, Evie. Thank you so much. Luana, you're up.
So I wanted to speak to terms and the cutover. I do think a fresh cutover, because people won't have to unlearn other processes. I do think there's some value in having an awareness of what those processes are when developing new ones. But the other part, in terms of terms, there are two things that come to mind for me. One benefit of longer terms is continuity, because some things are cyclical and there's an opportunity to identify patterns of behavior. And the other one is, regardless of what the terms are, that for the initial appointments, since if there's going to be a hard cutover, that there's something factored in for there to be some staggering of when those appointments end, so that, again, there is some consideration of continuity, and they're not always starting with a brand new set of members.
That's a really helpful reminder. If it were a set term for all the new commissioners, then we'd be setting up a whole new commission every however many years, 2, 3, 4 years. Great. Thank you so much, Luana. Andrea, did you want to follow up with Luana? Or should I continue?
No, that sounds great. Please continue.
Okay. Next up is Rose, followed by Brian Bonner, and then Angelo Haynes. So Rose, you're up.
Well, Dr. Richmond said it very well. I would like to see overlapping terms so that institutional memory is preserved, so that people don't have to come in and reinvent the wheel. So I would like overlapping terms. And I was thinking, well, we need diversity, we need the communities affected, but I was wondering if all council members could hold discussions with their constituents for nominees.
Great question. I will point out, I'm getting a message reminding me that staggered terms are how CRB operates now. And I think, Rose, what you and also Luana were pointing out is that helps build in the beginning and then also carry over institutional memory. So we're not starting from scratch every time.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Rose. So now we have Brian Bonner, followed by Angelo Haynes, and then Christina. Brian, you're up.
Good afternoon. The previous two speakers hit on my point that we do need to have staggered terms. I just look at it as if they all ended at the same time, you'd be lobotomizing the commission every 2 years, and so that's or however long the term is. The other question that comes up is also, should they be limited in the number of terms they serve? Because if you do put in term limits, you want to give them a long enough time so that your more effective commissioners will be able to continue to benefit the community.
If there were 2-year terms, how many 2-year terms do you think that they should have?
I would think 3 would be at a minimum, three terms.
3 terms max. So that would be a total of a 6-year term. Is that what you're suggesting, Brian?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much. That's really helpful. So next we have Angelo Haynes, followed by Christina, and then Ariana.
Hey, this might be unrelated, but I was sort of thinking in terms of, maybe the number of commissioners and geographical representation. And I was looking at the police neighborhood beat map, and there are quite a few neighborhoods. Perhaps that could be an effective template that we could use to make sure that we have each neighborhood represented. Because each neighborhood is a microcosm and it has its own unique culture and sort of soul. And I think that might be an effective way to get the representation we want. And we're also kind of, the other piece that leads into is maybe we should base the number of commissioners based on the number of sworn personnel in the police department, because our target is oversight. And if the amount of police officers we have are too many and too few commissioners, we can't effectively oversee, right, the folks that we're trying to keep watch over. So I think we should have a good idea of how many sworn personnel operate at the San Diego PD. And that would also engineer flexibility into that process, right? It's almost like the census, you sort of update it every so often based off of the number of sworn personnel, if that makes any sense.
It absolutely makes sense, Angelo. I know Andrea and I and Poppy and so many other people have been thinking about these questions, and you've just given us so much to work with. So you started with the question, the number of commissioners, which is a major question.
Right.
The second argument or suggestion is that we might consider geographical diversity by beat map.
Correct.
As a template.
And the map that I had access to is from 2018, but it's publicly available on the site, and it's based off of neighborhood. One of the things you might find in that particular map is that these neighborhoods can be very small, and there's quite a few of them, hundreds of neighborhoods. So that could be something that we could use as an effective way, right? Because, obviously diversity is one thing as far as race and culture and things like that, but certain people from certain parts of certain neighborhoods, right, know the nooks and crannies of something, that someone else might not.
That's great. Thank you so much. And then the third suggestion is that the number of commissioners could be based, like the census, on the number of sworn officers at any given time.
Right.
Proportional representation.
Right.
That's so helpful. Thank you so much. We're going to move on now to Christina, followed by Ariana, and then Shane.
Hey, everybody. My name's Christina. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I wanted to affirm what everybody was talking about, the staggering term. And I hope that our group can think about also maybe decolonizing, right, the idea of staggered terms. I had the chance to, I think I waited to be on the CRB for, I think it was a year. And because it was already a solidified pro-police environment, the person who I essentially was supposed to replace, never reached out to me to teach me anything. And I also was discouraged by the pro-police anti-person culture in the group when I was there. I know that the creation of this commission, it won't be that culture, but just keeping in mind, if we're going to be having folks who I think historically are never asked to or allowed to be on commissions like this, that we're thinking about things like term limits, and we're also thinking about things that would discourage folks, by waiting, and also thinking about the way that we're mentoring one another after after that person's term is over. In thinking about also the size of the commission, I hope that we can make it as big as we want to, or as big as we can, with as many people as we can, because I'm thinking a lot of the mental health of folks on this commission. As a part of practice, when I was applying for the CRB, I was constantly traumatized by the decisions, and then the ways that that the fellow board members sometimes spoke about the lives of Black people. who we were seeking justice for, who they prioritized, right? The justice of protecting police officers over community members. So I'm thinking about all the things that people on the board or the commission will see and have to take home with them, and thinking about emotional fatigue and burnout is real. I don't think the district attorney, I agree with what other people are saying too, about who, no police officers, no police union, no retired police, no retired sheriff, or the district attorney should be allowed to be on this board. And also, when we talked about the, neighborhoods in San Diego being represented, I think that it's really important that we do that with an equitable lens. So as a Black person who's born and raised in San Diego, I may not know every neighborhood, but I know the neighborhoods where me or my husband will get abused by police. So I think having representatives of those neighborhoods, for people who live there, who know the nooks and crannies, I think for some areas that might make sense, right? Like, shout out to my City Heights family, City Heights folks, we live in a community that is heavily policed. We know all the parts of it, but places like La Jolla, where Aaliyah Jenkins was arrested and killed, eventually killed in police custody. Aaliyah was all the way from East County. So thinking about that, right? And, countless Black people in San Diego in the 90s can talk about the way that police harassed folks when they were trying to go to the beach. So thinking really critically about the people who are survivors of police violence being centered in this commission, and creating equitable ways that they're represented, and not just geographic.
Thank you so much. You gave us so much, Christina, and you remind us that building accountability and transparency into the commission is crucial, that the way the commission gets set up is really important, but so are the accountability measures going forward. I also heard overlaps with previous comments, and before I move on to Ariana, I do want to just reference one of the key questions Andrea started us with tonight was, what is the removal process or the removal criteria for commissioners? So thank you, Christina, just to flag a couple of your really excellent, helpful points. So Ariana, followed by Shane Haig, followed by Luana.
Thank you, Patrick. Hi, everyone. My name is Ariana. My pronouns, hi, Christina. My pronouns are she or hers, Mid-City Can. So I work closely with Youth Council. I am the Youth Council organizer. For the past 2 years, I supported and guided them through strategy in campaign and advocacy, everything that had to do with Measure B, and now for the funding for the independent commission. So, young people were very engaged in the process, and it's also a learning opportunity for them. They are currently in the ages of 15 to 18. Previously, we were advocating for 2 youth seats because young people are, amongst like specific communities and districts, young people are the people who are highly impacted by policing. The data shows it with Campaign Zero, even pediatricians. For instance, Dr. Rhea Boyd, she actually came out with a report that I was actually able to learn about, that the exposure to police violence, while victims of police violence are at risk for arrest, incarceration, injury, disability, or death, the witnesses may also be affected. In youth, witnesses violence accumulates in symptoms of PTSD, substance abuse, depression, poor self-rated health, attentional impairment, poor school performance, and school suspensions and expulsions. I also do just want to uplift that a lot of the young people who were involved were also, partaking in organizing protests back in the summer, so May, June. And they started to get really involved in the budget process. And this was unfortunately some of the first instances of police violence that they either witnessed or experienced. And you never want to ever have anyone, a sibling, a cousin, a neighbor, ever have to witness that. But I think we do have an opportunity to include young people into conversations of how we see police or law enforcement in our own communities. Young people are very resilient. And just overall with San Diego, we have so many universities, so many city colleges, so many prep schools, and just, for us to take away from them being able to serve their community, it's not right. So we'll continue to push for, youth seats. I really do like the idea of the selections committee. We need to ensure that, folks who are applying are going through some vetting. A lot of the times our community members have a really hard time either applying to boards and commissions or serving on boards and commissions because they don't see themselves or because they're not guided. And I think this is a really good opportunity to have a selections committee that ensures that the commission is actually reflected of the communities they serve. And I think that's why we continue to hear the ask of, we don't want police officers or retired officers to serve on this commission, as well as those who represent the POA. And I think we need to identify that as soon as possible if we truly want to be community-led.
Thank you so much, Ariana. That's so helpful. I think youth seats in particular are something that a lot of us are really committed to. And if I could just, you'll be receiving an email from me. I just received funding at UCSD to work with my colleague who's here, Caroline Collins, to develop a young scholars program for high school students in San Diego schools that is focused on interactions with the police, oversight, and outreach to youth communities. So I'll be sending something to you about that soon. It's going to be a funded thing to provide scholarships to students. Okay, next week. Yes, please.
When someone agrees with something someone is saying, I love that people are putting it in the chat. I'm going to encourage more people to do so. That helps us know
absolutely
how people really like a particular idea. So please, just say, yeah, I really like this idea. And that's going to help us a lot.
And I'll point out again that Poppy and I are going to record all of these comments, including in the chat box, and then distribute a list to everyone who's here tonight. So yes, please put comments in the chat box. Okay, next on our list is Shane, followed by Luana, followed by Joni. So Shane, you're up.
Thank you. Our discussion of the technique that should be used to assemble the committee has been guided tonight by the question of how to achieve diversity of participation. And this is proper because we can assume that diversity in membership will bring competing points of view to the deliberations. And diversity, and perhaps a new kind of diversity that will include those heretofore excluded, is essential to functionality and more so to the community's acceptance of the committee's products. So our present focus is on selection, that is the means by which we achieve a membership. But that is not the first question we must address. Diversity will bring to the committee well-entrenched views, preconceptions, and sometimes animosity toward contrary positions. The foremost issue here before us as we go forward is that of trust. Trust in the good faith of those with opposing views, trust in the credibility of the accuracy of one another's observations of the same reality, trust that each member will listen with great care to other members before drawing any conclusion, and trust in compromise. Perhaps I could make it this way, say it this way, above any question of the community or the place in the political spectrum or the socioeconomic background from which the members come, is that of whether they're ready to trust. And then once the body is formed, how do we ensure the preservation and deepening of that trust? And so whatever we do must include some evaluation of the ability that those that are going to go on the committee of the commission are prepared to offer one another that level of trust, rather than simply bring the animosities that so often drive them to even make application.
Thank you. Patrick, can I just ask really quickly? I was talking to Doug Case this afternoon, and he said something that I think is very appropriate to support Shane's comment. Doug, do you mind if, hopefully you don't mind, Patrick, if Doug, do you mind repeating to me what you said earlier today about commissioners and what that should look like?
I think you were talking about the purpose and philosophy of the commission, and I was making the point that I was taught when I first came onto the CRB, and I've continued to teach new members that they come onto the CRB that we're not there to serve as advocates for the complainant, nor are we there to serve as advocates for the police officers. We're there to ensure a fair and just process, to make sure that everything is investigated thoroughly and fairly, and that there is a finding that is consistent with the evidence. And so I'm assuming that's what you're referring to, but I think the important thing is the balance, that we're not there to to be advocates for the complainants or the police officers, but to be advocates for the process.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think that bottom line is what both you and Shane are saying is you want fair and reasonable people, and that's the number one qualification, right? And I mean, and because sometimes we miss that. I mean, when we talk about qualifications, we forget to list some of the most obvious qualifications.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's really the most obvious one. You want to make sure that this is a fair person and a reasonable person who is there to do the right thing.
That's great. Thank you. And thank you for bringing Doug in. And Shane, thank you for that really helpful articulation of what trust actually means in those 4 ways. Okay, next up we have Lawana, followed by Joni, followed by Mona. So Lawana, you're up.
So I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I do think it's really important as we look at being inclusive and having this be a broad in terms of inclusion of people from all over the community, that we don't allow the voices of the people that are being at risk or being harmed to be drowned out by people who don't really have any skin in the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. Big stars next to that reminder. I think you'll find a lot of agreement in this room. Thank you for keeping our focus on that.
I just want to protect us from the tyranny of the majority.
Yes, ma'am. All right, Mona, I think Joni dropped off. So we're at Mona, followed by Nancy Relaford, followed by Darwin.
Hi, I'm just a community member. I agree with a lot of what's been said. I have a minor disagreement with the clean break idea in terms of, I think you will lose knowledge of how things have been working. And I know, and I might be speaking out of turn because you may have a lot of people that have already given you that information. But it almost seems like the assumption there is that everyone that was on the committee before, or commission, wasn't doing a good job or didn't want to make the police accountable. But I think there were members that were frustrated by what they couldn't accomplish when they were on the commission. Genevieve Jones-Wright, for example, has spoken out very publicly about how it was a commission that didn't have any teeth. And so at the very least, I think there should be some kind of transitional process to capture their experiences. And, maybe they wouldn't have any voting rights or procedural rights, but you could you could reach out to members and ask them what did they think, what did they think worked well? What were they stymied by? What did they want to accomplish, but they didn't accomplish it? And maybe some of those people might even come back. And you might not want to discourage that because, they have knowledge that might be useful. So that was one thing. And then the other thing was, so in that vein, I don't know who the commissioners are now. I don't know how agreeable they are to a new point of view for greater police accountability, but maybe retain one or two for a year of transition. And it's just an idea. I don't know if it's feasible or not. The other thing, I think one of the first orders of business should be establishing an educational base for all of it. And you guys have already talked about this. So in that way, I'm not really saying anything new. But for example, I think it would be great to have mental health professionals on your board but they may not know anything about the legal system. And so if you had this whole kind of curriculum that brings people up to speed on considerations in their relative areas of expertise. So the mental health professionals could, be educating the, say, legal people on these are the things that you need to know about how the mental health system in this area works. Like if someone is mentally ill and they're on the street, what's going to happen to them? Regardless of if it's a police person or, if it's a police officer or community outreach or whatever. So just all that education and then just continuing to build on that education.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Mona. So you've given us a lot here, including alternate ways to ensure institutional knowledge through an advisory committee that may not have a vote or procedural participation. It's an interesting idea. And then, of course, the trauma of viewing all of this material over and over. You've reminded us that that needs to be an important part of this. And the last thing I heard you say, I just want to make sure I got this down right, is that the training and continuing education of the commission shouldn't just be focused on oversight practices, but should also be focused on larger public safety issues like social service responses to homelessness, mental health professionals' involvement, and so on. Did I hear that right?
Yes, because I think you need to have some kind of basic understanding of how those community services work so that you can slot in where the police go. So if you don't think the police should be responding to mental health calls, or you think that they should respond, but you don't like how they're responding and they need to improve on that, you need to have, everyone should have some background knowledge. And I think it's better to have it as part of your training than just be relying on that one person at your meeting to just speak on that issue every time it comes up.
Great.
That. There was one last thing.
Okay.
People were talking about connecting to the neighborhoods. And I agree with that. And so maybe part of the education piece is that you encourage each member on your board to establish an outreach to their communities so that, they're not just like this solitary person that sits on the board, and that's something they can report, like how they were successful. They went maybe and talked to a church group or a community group, but that they themselves get tied to the community.
Thank you so much. I've added that to the list.
All right.
Okay, we're going to move on. I want to point out that we're about halfway through. We've got about 50 minutes left. That's a whole lot of time, but we've got a whole lot of really smart people here who want to talk. So next up is Nancy Relaford. I hope I'm pronouncing that close to correct, followed by Darwin, followed by Angelo.
You did, that was correct. My name is Nancy Relaford. I use she, her pronouns. Let me see, I have two things. One is, and this is something I've heard at other forums, so I'm just wanting to amplify it and bring it in here. we talk about the nomination and self-nomination process and people being able to see themselves on the board. But the issue of compensation, or at least reimbursement of costs for members, time, childcare, transportation, and so forth, has been raised as important. And then timing of meetings, scheduling of meetings, and other activities around work, things like that. So just to kind of keep that on the forefront in making it possible for people to serve. So that, and then the other, in the discussion of trust and building trust versus animosity and reasonableness and so forth, there's also a reason that very well qualified people will bring animosity and anger onto the board, onto the commission. So I don't want civility to become like such a gatekeeper that people who have a lot of experience, negative experience with the police, don't make it onto the board because of how they present, because their anger is up front, if that makes sense. Just that It is important that people be able to work together with each other and be reasonable and exchange ideas, but tone policing and so forth, there has to be some way to build in that people will bring different points of views and different levels of trauma and anger, or naivete and complacency, both ways, but that somehow those be factored in.
Thank you so much. And I do want to point out, in that list of community concerns, we had a lot of many suggestions about providing transportation, meals, childcare, elder care, compensation for time, staggering the hours. And I also want to say we received emails from members of the unhoused community after the last roundtable who said that, who wanted to make sure that access for representatives from the unhoused community should be considered as a part of this process. I think that extends what you're raising, Nancy, in very important ways. Thank you so much. Okay, moving down the list, I want to encourage you, if you haven't spoken yet, feel free to raise your digital hand. So we've got Darwin, followed by Angelo, followed by Christina.
Thank you. I just want to add, so, because this hasn't been discussed as much, but part of the whole thing that motivated a whole lot of folks to vote for Measure B and why it's successful is the current CRB is not just a failure because it's a review model and people wanted a better model with investigative and that will do a better job structurally, but also even as a review model, CRB, and I think, we've come at this sideways, fundamentally failed and really failed a lot of communities. And I'll take it because I was a part of it, and certainly I fought with it, but I was still a part of it. And it failed in terms of, one of the ways to look at it, I say is really important, and think about this in terms of moving forward, is that the yearly report typically that came out for us showed our voting along the lines of the same as IA, internal affairs with the police, at about 99 to 100% of the time exonerating police officers. If you've got your board or commission that is civilian oversight for police that aligns with internal affairs every year and is about 100% of exonerating officers, yeah, I think that's a real failure, whether or not it's investigative or review. So part of the thing I would like to see with the makeup of the commissioners is hopefully an actual more holding police accountable. And there should, in that sense, be certainly less just a thing about voting along the lines with IA. With that, this is why I want to say that. I just want to real quickly so people understand why I'm saying, even for me, I would say as a past CRB member, I'm okay with not being a part of the new commission and having a blanket part about people that are currently on it or have been on the CRB not being a part of the new commission, at least for whatever 2-4 years, and then maybe you can reconsider it. But I do really think there needs to be a clean slate with the commissioners, new commissioners, and the new staff, in the sense that we are collectively responsible for that failure, producing those results. And you're not in that sense going to get better results if you put us back on there, sort of thing. You really need to try, in a sense, with new folks, and also have more buy-in from the community. First thing I got on the CRB, and I think this is also really important and it needs to be said really clearly, is I heard from folks in Southeast about they don't trust it, they don't believe in it, and it's not a thing about you can put more people on there and they're going to believe it. It needed what we've done so far with the structure, but now it needs to be added, a thing with new commissioners and the people are on it. And there wasn't anyone from Southeast, and specifically the 4th district when I was on there. And I think that part of what we also need to include in it is the whole thing about the 9 districts and representatives from all of those as part of it in terms of the commissioners. That is to be included. One last thing I want to say that also I think would be useful for people is making a distinction between things like, for example, banning police officers that you set up like they can't apply, active duty retired, versus what I would also caution about is handicapping for commissioners. Ideally, the commissioners, once they get on there, will decide their new members. Like, people will apply, and then like what I went through, they'll be interviewed. You send in an application, they'll be interviewed. I would like to allow them to have some power to make the decisions themselves, in the sense that trust the new commissioners to decide the new people that come on, and have the application process go directly through them, ideally not through something like city council or the mayor. So I just want to reiterate that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And if folks here are interested in looking at the annual reports that Darwin was referencing, they're available on the CRB website. I can't do 2 things at once, so I can't find that link and put it here, but it is on the CRB website.
Hey, Patrick, can I chime in real quick?
There's actually a list of, Christina, is it okay if we get a response first? Christina, is that okay with you?
No, you can wait after me.
Okay, so Brandon, if you could wait, it's Christina's up, and I'll put you next. Go ahead, Christina.
I was thinking about earlier when us thinking about using transformative justice as like ways to be able to determine when somebody is removed from the board. And like I'm in some groups where we're talking about harm, when we've caused harm to each other and harm that we've experienced, and using what it looks like to use transformative justice to be able to use, to not recreate the same carceral systems that we're fighting against within the building of these spaces. So yeah, and then like also our group, this group being the board and commission, like using like Black and other Black, Indigenous, and POC firms for like retreats and other opportunities to be able to strengthen the work. Thanks.
Thank you for that. And I'll point out, you're drawing our attention to transformative justice. It is really important. At the NACOL conference this year, NACOL is the National Association for the Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. It's a really interesting conference that brings together people from abolitionist perspectives, defund perspectives, reform perspectives, and brings them into conversation about oversight. This year, transformative justice was a big topic of conversation, and I think there's a future for what you're talking about, Christina. So thank you. And now, Brandon, if you'd like to, I think you wanted to make a comment.
Yeah. So Darwin brought up a really good point, and we actually have put out the annual report, and I noticed that Poppy put the link in there. One of the things that we did in the past with our annual report is we would just say how often we agreed with internal affairs. And we, as a board, I think, understand and agree that the community saw that number, and it made people think that we were always necessarily agreeing with the department. And the number itself sounds like that's true, but what that didn't do is that didn't say how often that we pushed back with internal affairs. And we said, hey, you said this was exonerated or unfounded or whatever, we disagree and we think it should be a sustained finding or a not sustained or something like that. So we would negotiate, or we would talk to internal affairs. They would say why they felt their case was correct. We would push back on why we think our case is correct. And so a lot of times we would sometimes change their mind. Sometimes they wouldn't, sometimes we would disagree. So when we do our reports, we have 3 different main findings. We can either agree with internal affairs, we could agree with comments, which is sometimes like, hey, yes, this was within policy, but we had concerns. So we would write our comment, or we could disagree with comment, which means we didn't agree with internal affairs. We would say why, and we would say what we thought that finding should be. So what we've tried to do in our annual reports is we at least now mark how many times we've asked for changes. And if internal affairs does agree with us, we actually mark that down, because technically when it goes to the board for a vote, we're agreeing with them, but we're only agreeing with them because they've changed their finding based on what their CRB team had come back with. So I just wanted to clarify that, because it's a very valid point. I think when the community saw that it was like 96-ish% of the time we were agreeing with the police department, the community as a whole saw that and they're like, that's horrible. Why are you guys agreeing so much? But what that doesn't truly show is how often we worked with the police department to change their findings to come up with sustained findings or a not sustained. And for the record, a not sustained is kind of like you can't prove it one way or the other, but that would stay on an officer's record. So if an officer had, a not sustained for discrimination or arrest or something like that, that does stay on that officer's record. So if there's another complaint that comes down, 6 months or a year later, that would still come up and it would kind of create a history. So I just wanted to kind of answer that one question, give a little bit more color to that.
Okay, thank you for the additional context, Brandon. I want to make sure, Andrea, that we stay on your question. So go ahead, please.
Okay, just one comment with Brandon. I think, Brandon, what your comment says, it speaks to the fact that the community didn't know and understand exactly what was going on in the CRB. And transparency is perhaps going to be another topic that we look at in these forums, how public and transparent we want the new commission to be. And so if people would like to see that as a forum topic, please put that in the chat.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think transparency and accountability, which I hear Brandon's comment is trying to increase the transparency of what's actually in those reports. Okay, I don't have any hands raised. Andrea, would you like to ask questions that might provoke?
Yeah. So we haven't really talked much about removal yet. And that's really, I think, an important topic. For example, if we have 2-year terms, well, I won't even go there, but for example, I would say bias might be a good reason to remove someone. We need to start saying what are the grounds for removal. So can anybody just kind of start talking about something easy like bias? Does everybody agree that, someone who is biased should not remain on the board or on the commission and should be removed? If so, what would bias mean to you?
I'm not so sure that bias can be used as an effective metric, because it feels like that's very subjective, right? Depending on who you ask. I would say perhaps maybe use it based off of record and interaction on the board itself. Maybe you could look at the notes and say, hey, there's a particular commissioner that holds up a lot of decisions, right? Base it off of the conduct in the commission and just previous history. Because I mean, bias, that just seems too subjective of a word to use.
Great.
Just my 2 cents.
Great.
Thank
Mona,
you, Angelo.
Yeah, Mona.
Oh, we've got a couple hands raised now. It was a good question, Andrea.
Please, go ahead.
So we've got Darwin, followed by Brian, followed by Christina, and more after that. So Darwin, you're up.
All right, thank you. And Andrea, I don't know if your question was specifically about me, since I was removed because of bias. I won't get into my situation, but I would say this. One is, you're right about removal. One of the obvious things, of course, is about confidential documents and looking at police records and incidents. And obviously that keeping that confidentiality and then being grounds for removal, certainly that's a thing we were reminded of on a regular basis. I would say the thing about bias, I'll say this. it was used against me, and even things like membership in the NAACP was used against me for grounds for removal. So I would say this in terms of protection, I would actually go the other way. I don't think there should be grounds for bias, and certainly membership in organizations should not be used at all. And I actually liked that. I'll put it this way. There were a lot of folks that were in organizations, involved in different organizations. There were also certainly in and of itself, there was a bias in terms of those organizations that were represented. I would hope that those that come on a new commission actually really stretch those bounds. Certainly when I came on, I didn't see folks that were members of organizations I worked in Southeast were a part of it at all. But I certainly didn't see things north of the 8, La Jolla, PB, OB. They had town council reps, so on and so on, were all very strong and present there. So I don't know, again, if you can mandate that, but I hope that folks are wise enough to keep track of that sort of stuff. I think that's going to be unavoidable. You're going to have all kinds of, in that sense, people, personal feelings, organizations they're a part of. I would say ideally is you want a diversity of that.
Thank you, Darwin. I think your point about tracking representation and how it should be a central duty of commission staff to track consistently and constantly to track representation across those different kinds of difference. So next up we have Brian, followed by Christina, followed by Anne.
Well, I would think that as a baseline, you would go to the city human resources department for some standards of behavior that it expect out of employees and other members of other boards in terms of sexual or racial actions or biases that would lead to termination from city employment, and that they then to begin to have an examination of other areas that are peculiar to the new review board, and that's but there should be some baseline standards of behavior that they're already in existence that you begin your conversation from, as opposed to starting with a blank sheet of paper.
Mm-hmm. So starting from city HR, starting from the sort of baseline expectations and then figuring out what are the tweaks that would need to be made in the context of this board.
Yeah, I would think that there would be demands from on people from this commission that would be far different than somebody else, noise complaint or another kind of commission that the city has. But there is a baseline of behavior that you would expect from people working in a group setting.
Thank you very much, Brian. Christina, followed by Anne.
Yeah, I want to kind of lift up the very palatable for me tension that is coming up between like Darwin and Brandon. I think that Darwin is lifting up some things that are like important, and Brandon, like I get that you're the CRB chair, and like this is uncomfortable because it's like somebody coming for your job, but like as those of us, because like, whenever you're like me, for instance, I've had jobs where I've by accident upheld white supremacy, and I have to answer for my actions of that organization in the community. It's hard, it's nasty when people blame me for or blame my organization I was a part of or whatever. But the thing is that like what people's experiences are in this world, I have to hold that. And, as somebody who's lived in San Diego, and like, I also, when I was waiting to get on the board for CRB so many years ago, right? About like six or 7 years ago, like, I was working at ACLU at the time, and I had the chance to start a really exciting campaign of, holding police accountable. And I asked for direction from CRB if I should excuse myself because I was young and because I was uncomfortable. You know, like it was weird being like a Black girl, a Black woman in those environments, asking people why they didn't understand that like a Black man getting arrested by accident in front of his children wasn't embarrassing or wasn't something that he at least deserved an apology, and wasn't something where police officers acted inappropriately. I was doing so much education, and also like this was like 2013, 2014. I'm a totally different person now with support and affirmation from my community. So like, yo, Brandon, like I get it, but like you need like this isn't the time to kind of roll out like that. CRB has been doing such a perfect job, or not even a perfect job, but being like, you know, I get it, y'all been trying, but we also have to hold that trying has not been enough to really to like, you know, has not been enough to stop the killings of Black people, Indigenous folks, POC, people with disabilities, people who are veterans, right, in our city. Um, well, I think that was it. Cause I get a little wild in the comments. So I have to like step back and be like, wait, what am I trying to say? So I want to I do want to like lift that up, and also it being like really important. Like for instance, like I was arrested during one of the protests in San Diego, like, you know, like with like being worried, right, that being arrested would be cause for like removal or arrested for a certain type of thing. That concerns me because a lot of our youth, they get in trouble for, you know, trolley hopping. A lot of adults get in trouble for trolley hopping, and you do get tickets. And sometimes you can get arrested, and sometimes bail is weird. So, you know, I think, I know that we're not going to finish all those things and figure it all out tonight. But I don't know, I'm excited to lift up or be of as much help as I can, and like offering up solutions and hypotheticals too. So
Thank you, Christina. Thank you. I appreciate you, Christina. I think there is a tension. I mean, I really appreciate your naming it. There is a tension for those of us who have been working countless hours on a board that in the recent vote, San Diego, 75% of the vote said, it's not working, we want something else. And there's tension there. It's absolutely right. There's tension. I can only speak for myself here. I'm not here as a CRB. This isn't a CRB meeting. But I've said publicly, and I personally believe that this is the right way to approach this, that I am fully willing to step aside to let the transformation happen. As much as I'm committed to this work, I am fully willing to follow the community on these questions. And Christina, appreciate your naming that tension. I think it's always important to name it. Anne, I'm sorry I took a moment there in between, but it is now your turn. You've been so patient. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I've really appreciated this conversation. The Racial Justice Act, and I wanted to bring, as we talk about naming discrimination and unconscious bias and white supremacy, you know, on the board, not just the CRB, but any appointed board that's working for the power structure, right? So the Racial Justice Act might be a template that we can use to really call out, examine, and re-educate, re-examine how we're making decisions on the board. They do describe what discrimination looks like. It's a very concise description based on practice, what you're seeing in front of you. So perhaps we could use that. And I do really, really want people who've been in the criminal justice system and incarcerated to also be considered as potential board members. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. From this roundtable and from the previous, there seems to be a strong community sentiment that formerly incarcerated people and people who've been found guilty of a crime not be excluded from service. That does seem to be a strong message that the community is sending us. So we now have Evie, followed by, the name here is NLG Low Team. So Evie, you're up first.
Hi, yeah, I just would like to make a simple comment that everyone is biased. There is no one that is not biased. You just come up with worldviews, with experiences, with backgrounds, with religion, with perhaps racial things. Perhaps you're an immigrant or parents were. There is nobody without bias. The big question is, where are those biases going to be creating a problem with either working together or making decisions? And I think that that gets talked about, first of all, you in the interview or in the acceptance of someone, that you bring up some of this, that it not be just answering questions or putting something on paper, that there be a couple of important questions that you ask of someone and see, are they willing to face some of this? We did some of this in Mid-City CAN. They do some wonderful training, and some good people around in the community that do this kind of training. Up till now, most of the trainings have occurred, say in police situations, but police finding training people or having police training. It should be from outside if you wanted to reflect community values. But I think that just acceptance in oneself, as much as you feel you are not biased, you have some biases. And once you realize that, you try to work with them then in terms of being fair when you're making your decisions around the particular cases. So there's two different things. One is working together as a group with the commission people, and the other is when you're dealing with cases, how are you looking at the fairness and what happened in those cases in terms of making your judgments. And those are really kind of two very different positions to be in.
Thank you so much, Evie. So I'm thinking back to Andrea's question about removal of people, and one of your comments makes me think. So Brian said earlier we should start with the basic HR, the sort of rules for getting along as a city volunteer. But your comment about Mid-City CAN makes me think community organizations that have a strong record in thinking about how well organizations are working and how they're not should also be involved in that process. So to turn to organizations like Mid-City CAN and ask questions like this one could be helpful. Andrea, is this, Evie, Evie, are you trying to speak? You're muted.
I was going to make one other comment. We had one of our members from Women Occupy who was arrested during the Occupy movement situations that arose, which really started our tremendous interest in this whole police issue. And when she applied and went for the interview, she was basically told that she was an activist and that was not good. Now, if you're not going to be an activist in anything, I'm not sure who you're going to have on that committee. I mean, that seemed to be at the time. Now, I know that there's been a lot of change over the years that I've been sitting in with the CRB, and I'm really pleased to have seen a lot of those changes. But I think that that needs to be made clear, that you can't be cast out because you're an activist. I should hope these days most people were active in something in their community.
Thank you for that. I mean, I can speak for myself. I've been an activist for 30 years or more and involved in community work. And I'm not the only one on the board by far. But it's an important question that people involved in local groups who have been focused on this work should be involved centrally in the commission, given that Measure B passed with the percentage that it did. So thank you, Evie. Next up, what does it say in this box? NLG Low Team, who is that?
That's the Legal Observer Team. I'm Kylie Bellinger.
Oh, Kylie, hi. Sorry.
Hi.
Sorry about that. I was just looking at the wrong box.
You're fine. So just a quick point I wanted to make, because folks are bringing up discussion about former or about criminal record and current criminal activity as possibly being disqualifying factors. I think that that is a very dangerous road to go down, because that could encourage certain behaviors by law enforcement to affect the makeup of the board, because law enforcement officers obviously have a say in who goes to jail and who doesn't, right? So I think that there is something that we should definitely shy away from. Other than that, I've got to go in a second, and I'm just gonna leave my comments as to everything else that we've gone over up until now.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you for being here tonight. Andrea, I don't have any hands raised, and it looks like we have about 10 or 15 minutes before we wanted to start to sum up. Would you like to ask another question?
Actually, Andrea, it's Poppy. May I jump in just really briefly? I'm not going to take up a lot of time, but I do want to make a note that in the chat, there are lots of comments coming in related to representation of specific groups, and those, there's a wide variety coming in, but victims of human trafficking, prostitutes, the LGBTQ community, and others. And I just want to lift up, because I promised that I would, that we received an email tonight from James Roush, who's the secretary for the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee, who wanted us to hear his comment that though he's not able to join us, he wanted us to remind everyone that Arabs and Muslims are subjects of police profiling and harassment. So it is important to ensure at least one representative of the Arab community and one representative of the Muslim community on the Commission on Police Practices. So I just wanted to find a moment to bring James' voice in, and also to lift up those that are happening in the chat.
Thank you, Poppy.
Yeah, thank you, Poppy. I think that that is great. And that kind of goes into the question that I got in the chat. Someone said that they felt that we needed to have a little more discussion about the selection committee. And how, you know, we've talked about them being community members. And so I'd like, you know, people to talk more about that. So again, the city council is going to be the technical appointment, but we still need a committee that's going to select and nominate people to be appointed. So how should we put together this selection committee? I was talking about how Kate Yevendetti said, okay, the original organizations that put forward Measure B. What are some other suggestions about how we might make up this selection committee?
Thank you, Andrea. So we're talking about a kind of community-based advisory committee to take nominations, do outreach, and then do the interviewing process to make nominations to City Council. I see a hand from Michael Brackney. Michael, you're up.
Yeah, it's not to your latest suggestion, Andrea. I just wanted to say that I think it would be good if the commission as a whole met together from time to time to assess their own behavior and how well they're measuring up to the standards that they want to follow. Maybe that will be a
Oh, I think we lost you, Michael.
I'm back now. I think that would be a way for commissioners to gauge themselves and encourage themselves to do better wherever they find they've fallen short. That's it.
So you're talking about structuring and regular accountability measures for the commission itself that are structural, that are regular. Okay.
Yeah, which would avoid the need to eliminate anybody. I mean, if commissioners can help each other with problems that look like they're beginning to surface, then they can be addressed before anybody, goes off the deep end.
Thank you for that. And I would add to that that the community should be involved in that accountability, whether it's this committee who's doing interviews and making nominations, or a broader collective of people. Thank you, Michael. I hope this person can help me say their name correctly. It's Rocio. Can you help me learn how to pronounce that right?
Rocio.
Rocio, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me, or for having this. Sorry, this has been really informational. I think in terms of selecting who to be, whether who is on the commission or who's selecting the commissioners, I think looking at it at the angle of who has a track record of working with the people who have been most directly harmed by the police. Because the data shows that Black communities are harmed the most, Brown communities are harmed the most, people in poverty, people who have been formerly incarcerated. So just beyond, just representation, and I know we're using community very vaguely, but I want to be very specific and intentional about the folks who have that track record of working with people who have been directly harmed. I understand policing has been already very biased against a lot of Black and Brown communities. So just looking at it through that angle to have more of an equitable perspective.
Thank you very much for that. So focusing on people who've been involved with working with communities of those who are over-policed, of the formerly incarcerated. I think
Yes.
I got that down right. Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. We now have Kate, followed by Evie.
Yes, I just want to add, I was late, so it sounds like maybe Andrea already put out my position that I wrote out earlier, but just to flesh it out a little bit, my thought was that the initial selection committee, yes, would start with a rep from Women Occupy Earl B. Gilliam and Mid-City Can, and that those people would pick additional members of the selection committee up to maybe like 10, and it would focus on what Rocio just said and what other people are saying. People who have worked with people who've been affected by over-policing, people from organizations with strong community ties, but that is what would make up the selection committee. And it would be accountable to the community so that, the community could also have a say in who's on that committee. If they're going to say, no, I don't want somebody from X organization because they're like a sellout group or they have ties to the POA or whatever. I think that there should be input in everything that the commission does. And that input includes who's going to be on the selection committee, and that what that committee does is transparent, and vetting the applicants and all that sort of thing is my thought of what the committee would do. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. And did I hear you right? And I remember this from your email. You were thinking a committee of 10.
I was thinking that's just kind of a manageable number. It seems to me that but if they're reps from organizations, I would assume that, if somebody from if the designated rep from Women Occupy couldn't make it, then that person could designate someone else from our organization. But I don't see it being really a large group, because I just think that's really hard to just manage logistically.
Thank you so much. Okay, we've got Evie, then Anita, then Angelo.
Hi, this is Evie. I just want to suggest that perhaps there's a need occasionally for some good facilitation whenever there seems to be tension, whenever there's going to be evaluation and the like. People are much freer to be able to speak up and say what they really need to if there is someone outside of the group facilitating. And we tend not to use that kind of resource often enough, I think, in groups.
That's a really good point. I know that mediation has come up as something that could be involved more actively in these kinds of boards and commissions, and you're sort of expanding that to think about a facilitator for meetings. That's
occasionally, yeah, or for trainings or whatever.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Thank you. Okay, Anita and then Angelo.
Yes, I just wanted to point you to the chat room. Somebody suggested that we could take criteria like where are the most police stops made, you know, and get more representation from those districts. And secondly, I wanted to say that I'm personally not sure what people in, let's say, the more affluent districts would have. In other words, if we have like a 10-person board, as Kate was saying, we were saying initially we would take it from all 9 districts. My point is that I don't think that that would reflect a true picture of the people who are actually having problems with the police. So my point would be that if the stops are more in District 4 or whatever, that we get more than one representative from that area and not necessarily have nine different districts represented. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And Anita, your comment reminds me of Angelo's comment at the beginning of the meeting, and Angelo's our next speaker. So, Angelo.
Thank you, Patrick. You know, one thought I was thinking about for the selection committee process is not necessarily the outcome, but the actual process itself. And I was thinking about like a caucus model of selection where perhaps it could be facilitated by council members, but essentially maybe you have a town hall and you group people together and you say, hey, who wants to step up? And then maybe have people vote and have it be like sort of a grassroots organic sort of a thing. But the city council is not involved. It's basically like people coming together, they talk amongst themselves and people volunteer and then they kind of pick. And then that's who the council member will put forward, if that makes any sense. Does that make sense?
It's a really interesting idea, and I've written it down.
Yeah, just sort of like more of a grassroots sort of. I'm just imagining in my head, let's say, because I'm in District 4, Monica Montgomery would bring our community together and say, hey, we want people that are interested in being on this selection committee. Who wants to step forward? And then that person steps forward. They talk about themselves, what they want, and then people either second or they say no, and the people decide.
So you're talking about, I'm sorry to interrupt, you're talking about a selection, a caucus model for selection of people to be on the advisory committee.
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. And it's just facilitated by the city council, and they each come from each district, but the city council members have nothing to do with it. It's the communities that people from those communities step forward, and then those people in those communities vote for those people.
And then those are the people who join this committee to interview people and make nominations to the city council. That is so interesting. Andrea, what do you think of that?
I agree. I think that that is very interesting. What is appealing about it is the grassroots nature of it, right? I mean, you know, I need to think about it in more detail because, you know, a lot of things are running through my head, but I love the grassroots nature of it, right? You know, and that's what we're really trying to get to.
I'm hearing Lawanda's reminder earlier of Dr. West's words. We want to be cautious of the tyranny of the majority, which always arises in ideas that are about choosing. Okay, Andrea, I think we are almost at the point when Lawana, did you want to respond to my comment?
Yeah, I just want to say, you know, and this is just an example. I used to do a lot of like open mic poetry forums, and what we would do, especially if there was prize money, is everybody just make sure all their friends were there, and so they'd be more actively vested in making sure that the room was full of people that would clap and support them. So, you know, that's one. I mean, I like the caucus model. I'm just my one hesitation is making sure that there's a way to even make sure there's some balance in the representation of the people within the caucus making that choice.
And it's not a popularity contest or,
right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's the grassroots part of it, the embedding it in the community so firmly that that's really ringing a bell for me. We have about 5 more minutes, Andrea, before we were going to start to close. I do see one more hand raised.
And after that person speaks, could I, in the last few minutes that we have, I'd like to know what other topics would people like to see in the next forum. For example, I think probably from what I've heard, a lot of people want to see as much of the new commission's workings made public as possible. Maybe we should have a forum about that. I've heard a lot about accountability of the commissioners. Maybe we should include that in a forum. And again, I'm just kind of throwing out ideas. So I'd like to hear from you. What do you want to see at the next forum?
Okay, and what I can do is share a screen of some of the themes that emerged from the first roundtable, and maybe we can ask people of that list if there's something they'd like to see or if there's something else. So Mona, I think you have the last general comment.
Well, my comment was just, what did the people who engineered Measure B think about the idea of creating their own districts in terms of CRB representation? So you could use the crime data and use the boundaries of the communities of San Diego. So like City Heights, Rancho Bernardo, these are communities in San Diego. La Jolla is a community. And then you can make sure that each community has roughly representational, either arrest or stop and frisk or whatever metric you want to use, but make your own districts so that you might have larger geographic districts that will have the same sort of police interaction or same order of magnitude of police interaction as other districts. And so then those concentrated those districts where there's only a few communities, but they represent a lot of the friction between the community and the police, those will have that representation. And I feel like that's something you could do fairly, and then you could still use your caucus model to bring people. And the way you would advertise it is you would say, well, these communities are invited to this caucus and these communities are invited to this other caucus, and I mean, it's just a thought.
It's helpful, and it reminds me of Angelo's comment earlier about using the beat maps as a template for thinking geographically about representation. Okay, if it's all right with everyone, since Andrea would like for us to look at future roundtables, I'm going to share screen. This is the list of, do I need to make it bigger? Let's see, how's that? Is that okay? So this is the list of themes that emerged after the last, it's a bit hard to read, but there are a lot of ideas that emerged out of that. And if we're thinking about future roundtables to continue to develop these ideas, is this a starting place, Andrea? Do you want to hear just people throwing stuff out?
I think I'm just looking at vision and purpose of the commission. I like that. Complaint process is a great one. Community involvement, accountability, transparency, great. I think that could be part of a forum. And we could combine some into one forum because, again, this one was one topic because it was the big topic. Mm-hmm. Training of commissioners is important. How much of a hand should the San Diego Police Department have in training the new commissioners? That's something that's really important. The discipline recommendations, really important. So hopefully everybody's putting in the chat their suggestions on what the next forum should be as I'm kind of talking about these and reading them off. And also not just these, but any other things that people think are important.
And I'll just say that, Andrea, if it's okay, that a lot of what we've heard tonight about the selection process actually connects to, for example, accountability, training. We've heard people talk about that tonight. So maybe after Poppy and I have compiled the comments again, we can send them back out to everybody and then get feedback at that point too. Andrea, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I'm just reading some of the other suggestions in the chat. I'm liking them. Please put them in the chat and we can get a sense of what they are and design the next forum around that. I saw a timetable, which is really, really important. A lot of stuff is really good.
It looks like a lot of people have questions about some of the sort of internal process, like what the timeline is, what roadblocks we can expect. I wonder if we might not plan at a future roundtable just to demystify as much of that as possible, just to provide some clear explanation. I can also share more documents that were developed by the transition committee about the timetable for the transition. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in the chat box. Andrea, I think you're muted.
Yeah, this is all really great stuff. And with that, I think it is probably just about time for us to close. Poppy and Patrick, you want to kind of talk to us a little bit about the compilation process of these notes and what you're going to be sending out, and we'll make our final good nights.
So last time what we did, we said it would be within a week. It took us 3 days. We may not be able to do it that quickly right now, given the timing. But what Poppy and I do is compile all comments in the chat box from our notes of the discussion and from emails that have come in. And then we create a kind of synthesis in addition to the comments of the key issues and themes that have emerged. Then what we do is send that list to everybody who's on that list so that they can see how their comments are represented and make any corrections that they want to make. And then once we get those corrections back, we make them and then make the document public. So that was our process last time. If it worked for those who were at the last roundtable, we'll use the same one again.
Can I also say one more thing before we go? Our next forum is scheduled for January 11th at 5 p.m. And I do also have to say this. I am just over the moon, happy and gratified at all of you who have shown up and the interest that you have shown. This is like my dream, to have the community as invested in this as you are, as you all are. And I am just going to work with everybody the best I can to incorporate what you really want in this new commission. And I couldn't be more grateful. I thank you so much.
Andrea, you're the one who deserves so much praise for all your work on Measure B and all your organizing and your longtime commitment to San Diego for San Diegans. So thank you. You're an inspiration. I also want to acknowledge the council members who are here. Thank you for being here. Also the other current CRB members, including our chair, Brandon Hilpert, and the transition committee chair and first vice chair, Doug Case, and to everyone else who's cared so much about this issue and has been working on it for so long. Thank you so much for that commitment.
Patrick, before we close, I do want to just let folks know that because there was interest at the top of the meeting, I put the link to the appointments and reappointments to the Community Review Board on Police Practices memo from the mayor's office in the chat. So before folks drop off, if you're very anxious to take a look at that memo, you're welcome to grab that link there.
And I'm going to copy where it is and then paste it again at the bottom, just so it's the first thing in the chat as of right now. Thank you, Poppy. Yeah. There's also an email address. If you want to receive the compiled comments, please send your email to cppoutreachcommittee@gmail.com. That's in the chat box. If you received all the mailings from the first roundtable, then we've already got your email. But if you didn't and you'd like to, please let us know. Is there anyone else?
We lost the chat again.
Uh-oh. You lost the, how is this happening?
I switched it. It keeps,
it's back on.
It keeps defaulting, and I keep having to change it.
That is so strange. Okay, would anyone else like to, yeah, Poppy, go ahead.
I'm so sorry to jump in one more time,
No.
but I do want to acknowledge, I've just learned that there are some new appointees to the board who are represented here today, and I'm so sorry, I'm not sure who you all are, but I want to thank you for being here tonight. So I just wanted to to make that acknowledgement before we closed.
Great.
With that, I think we should say good night.
Good night, everybody.
And thank you. And hopefully we'll see you January 11th at 5 p.m.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
I am